Great. So I don't know if you all saw that screen where you click on got it. You're just acknowledging that we're being recorded. So again, this is Lucy Moore, facilitator for the meeting these next 2 days, New Mexico Water Dialogue 28th Annual. Proud to be here. I'm going to turn it over now to Aaron Chavez, who is the president of the New Mexico Water Dialogue Board. Aaron?
Lucy,
I'm sorry, Aaron. Also, forgot to offer you this poll. We want to just find out a bit about each of you and see what this group as a whole, as a community looks like. So we're asking you to answer just 3 questions. Is this your first meeting? How many meetings have you been to? Where are you from and your age? Helps us just get all, and we will see the results in a couple of minutes. We'll see. So just click on those while you're listening to Aaron. Aaron, thanks.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 28th Annual New Mexico Water Dialogue meeting. This year's Water Dialogue title, An Unprecedented Water Crisis, A Time to Act, is not just a title, but a call to action for all who are vested in New Mexico's future. We have examples of how ongoing drought conditions brought about environmental and lifestyle changes. In that thought, our perspective of change need not be swayed from one extreme to the other. As you participate in this meeting, I encourage you to see the facts of drought and/or climate change for what they are, disseminate and provide information, and seek out what is possible within the planning process. As we move into this new year, the New Mexico Water Dialogue remains steadfast in its commitments of encouraging open expression of opinions and ideas. And at one time or another, you may have heard the expression, failure to plan is a plan to fail. With this in mind, the Water Dialogue is honored to be a partner in the 50-year water plan that Governor Lujan Grisham tasked the New Mexico Interstate Streams Commission has put into action. This process includes a team of research experts that were diligently working and providing an assessment of changing temperatures and water resource conditions, and a description of what New Mexico's water resources could look like over the next 50 years. Many have provided input for the Leap Ahead analysis, and we continue our participation in the resilience assessment and creation of strategies to achieve resilience. New Mexico is a state with an abundance of natural resources that are shared by many. As president of New Mexico Water Dialogue, I ask for your participation over the next 2 days as we partake in the intellectual resources that are plentiful for us all to absorb and share. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you during this virtual journey. And as a member of the New Mexico Water Dialogue, I'm excited to hear from our presenters and our membership as well. Thank you and enjoy our annual conference.
Aaron, thank you so much and really appreciate your serving as president. Your leadership has been so valuable and much appreciated. So let us, and I'm looking at the chat, there's confusion about the poll. Sorry about that. I agree, if it's between your first meeting and at least 10 doesn't really work. So if you've been to 6, but let's, I'm going to end the poll and then we can see, I think the results. Okay, are you all seeing the results here? So I think what's very interesting is that 54% of those of you who responded, this is your first meeting. That's fabulous. We're really, really happy to welcome you to this community. And 5% have attended at least 20 meetings, almost all, maybe all. In terms of geography, we have 63% Albuquerque Santa Fe area, not surprising, but a good percentage from all the other quadrants, much appreciated. And apologies to South Central, probably Las Cruces didn't know which quadrant to be in. And I think you're often in that position, so apologies for that. Age-wise, nobody under 25 yet. maybe they're sleeping late. I don't know. Hopefully we'll have some here. But a good variety there, over 25. So thank you for that. All right. So I want to introduce our keynote speaker, Mike Hammond. Mike has been thrust into a really important and kind of new role as the senior water advisor for the governor of New Mexico. And Mike, we're so grateful. I know your focus is the 50-year water plan. That is our focus too. And we're very grateful that you're here with us. If you could, Mike, speak up, I think you'll appear on the first screen. And Jeffrey, have you got Mike's slides?
Yes, I do. I'll get them up there now.
Great, great. There you are, Mike. Great. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Lucy and Aaron, for inviting me to be your keynote speaker today. It's quite an honor to kick this important discussion off. I just have a quick little story to say. In September, we were up on a San Juan Chama contractors tour of the facilities, and having gone through an important evening meeting discussing a number of issues related to that project and some of the things going on in the Colorado River, I get a call about 8 o'clock at night. I'm on the phone with my wife, going through our evening good nights, and I said, well, I better take this call. And it turned out it was a cold call from Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, starting her recruitment of me to come and join her team. And I had other plans. I was planning on retiring sometime in the spring of this year from the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, and starting some other endeavors like improving on my small farm in Corrales, and got some things I've been putting off for a long time that I want to do on a personal level. But she's a very persuasive person. If any of you know her, for sure that's the case. And I did agree to come join her team as her senior water advisor. And to give you what I believe is my roles and responsibilities in a nutshell, I am working on behalf of her in order to implement a statewide policy and infrastructure process, working in collaboration and in partnership with the department heads and the various other parts and agencies within the state government that have anything to do with water and natural resources, as well as a coordinating role with the federal agencies that are providing infrastructure funding for across the spectrum for water needs in the state. So, no pressure, no small task, of course, but working on a process of getting that implemented, and also, just around the corner is the session, and that's what's great about the water dialogue. It always sets a tone for the coming year and the session at hand. So I'll be obviously very engaged in that process, working with the legislature as well, and mediating the process of the various bills that come through that are related to water resources development, et cetera. Next slide, please. One of the things that I wanted to emphasize is that, it's no surprise that New Mexico is an arid state. We've all been living here. I've been living and working in New Mexico since my early days up in Taos. Grew up there, and I got 40 years of water resource development experience, primarily in the Middle Rio Grande area, but also in the entire state at various stages of my career. And it's important to emphasize the evolution of New Mexico water policy. And the reason I bring this up is because we've been adapting to change and the aridity of the state for a number of years. The 20th century was the biggest adaptation process that we've been going through. But prior to that, the Spanish-Mexican law for acequias and communities was set up as a sharing of shortage and community unity as a guiding principle for how communities would work together to manage water. Then as the evolution of change occurred post-treaty of 1848, eventually the prior appropriation doctrine came into being for water administration in the territorial days that addressed administration after 1907. And then in 1923, the Conservancy Act was formed, state law that allowed the formation of the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District to do a number of things that included the construction of Alvaro Dam. And that's an instance of adaptation to provide more stability and resilience in the Middle Valley as a consequence of things going on in the San Luis Valley and other activities that were preventing the full utilization of water in the Middle Rio Grande and Lower Rio Grande Valley at the time. And then several interstate compacts came along that were negotiated based on conditions on the ground, water supplies that were available to the various states were negotiated to be shared under the compact rules. Several federal projects came into being. The earliest one that I'm aware of, there was two really that were very early. Carlsbad Irrigation District was one of them, and then Elephant Butte Dam was a major structure that was built to provide resiliency for the Rio Grande Project folks in New Mexico and Texas, and for the Republic of Mexico. And several other projects came into being. A lot had to do with flood control acts, again trying to control damage and utilize facilities to again adapt to conditions on the ground. Of course, there's adjudications, and then one of the newer things on the forefront as a new adaptive management tool is the active water resource management processes and procedures that are being starting to be implemented in certain areas. And one of the examples I'll throw out is on the Rio Chama Acequia, negotiated between the upper acequias and the lower acequias. They have a shortage sharing agreement there, and the Alvaro Dam plays a role in that important process up there. So the real point of this slide is that people have been adapting to conditions on the ground in New Mexico for over 150 years or so, based on different conditions.
These are claims of the years you can put away.
I'm getting some feedback. Someone needs to mute their mic.
Please mute yourselves. Thanks. Sorry, Mike.
Oh, Mike, you are now muted. One moment.
Okay, how does that sound, everybody?
Great, thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. All right, here we are, 21st century, persistent drought and climate change concerns that we are all gathered here today to discuss in a lot of detail. The 50-year water plan, et cetera, is all designed around the next set of resiliency implementation factors that we need to put together. And during the 20th century, water policies and infrastructure was scaled to what people are saying in the studies that this period of time has been an above average water supply scenario compared to the long-term record. So our policies and infrastructure has been scaled to above average water supply situation that we all understand. As paleohydrology suggests, that the current background drought is part of the longer term cycles that have been observed through prehistory, through tree ring analysis, et cetera, that this area, the Southwest, has suffered severe droughts of large magnitude in the past. And we have that as a baseline right now of persistent drought over the last 15 years or so that has caused quite a bit of shortage problems throughout the state. Okay, well, how is this being impacted by CO2 driven climate change? Well, the observations we've seen since the 80s reveal warmer springs with reduced low snow persistence, the lower snow bands. I grew up in Taos. We used to have snow in the valley up there well into May. You don't see that anymore. We've got lots of changes that have been gradually occurring since that time frame during my professional observation period of my life here in the Middle Valley and upper basin. And we'll hear later regarding the leap ahead analysis by Amelia Dunbar and the team that is working put together a great report that reveals added aridity due to the higher temperatures that are already being observed. So what does it all mean? How quickly is it coming to us? Are we adaptable enough? We've proven that we're very adaptable thus far to all the changing conditions. Water managers have been pushing the institutional constraints and the operational scenarios to the limit that I believe we currently enjoy with the reservoir systems and the policies and procedures that we've gradually changed to meet a number of new demands on the system. If you call endangered species a new demand, it's really an ecological system preservation aspect that is driven kind of by endangered species issues, but one that's viewed as a very important factor in managing river basin systems that we have taken into account in over the last couple of decades through a lot of water management and policy changes. Next slide, please. I throw this in just because it really speaks to just one factor that we're dealing with right now, and this is an over and under in terms of deliveries to the Rio Grande to Elephant Butte via the requirements under the Rio Grande Compact for New Mexico. And you can see we've gone through a declining cycle of water availability to meet the compact requirements, and we are now headed to a situation potentially that we are fighting hard to avoid, and that is the 200,000 acre-foot debit compact violation limit that's built into that very resilient document. It was well constructed. It allowed for debits and credits for New Mexico. And since 1985, when Elephant Butte spilled, New Mexico's been doing admirably well in meeting its compact obligations up until the last 3 years, as this graphic shows. Next slide, please. 90-day outlook. We had a great atmospheric river that hit like El Nino coming in there for December. It felt like a El Nino event. We got a lot of snowpack in the San Juan and Rio Chama and upper Rio Grande basin that was put us at about 130% of normal for this time of year. But what this reveals is we're actually in a persistent La Nina pattern at the moment, and the 90-day outlook from the Weather Service calls for higher temperatures and below normal, and maybe well below normal precipitation. So we're not out of the woods yet, but I've seen a number of strange things in this last 20 years where you're in a La Nina pattern, but the jet stream shifts up and down the coast, and New Mexico magically gets some snow events later in the season. So we're still hoping for more, but hope is not a plan, and so we have to plan accordingly if that does not transpire. Next slide, please. So, you know, my job and the job of all of us in state government and you know, our federal partners and our communities that we serve is to, you know, look for solutions and take advantage of opportunities. And we do have some unique opportunities once in a generation right now in terms of available federal dollars, and also the state income stream doesn't look too bad either right at the moment, due to the uptick in oil and gas revenues and other resources that we've received, including the ARPA funding, et cetera. But we have some short-term actions that we got to address right away. Based on the last slide I showed you, we do anticipate 2022 being a below normal year. We're in compact debit in the Middle Rio Grande. We have other interesting issues going on in the regional solutions that are underway in the Gallup area and in eastern New Mexico, since those projects have not been built out yet for the resilient factor that a lot of communities have shifted to is trying to use surface water when it's available as its day-to-day checking account, and then reserving groundwater as the long-term savings account in the event that surface water wanes from year to year. So that's the overall strategy that many agencies and many utilities and communities have turned to, is this dynamic process of conjunctive management. But in the short term, we have some issues. We need to catch up on Rio Grande compact deliveries. We also want to support the farm community and support the transition that they're going to have to be going through with the persistent drought factors. I've spoken with many irrigation entities that understand that there may be a new normal for them, but there has to be foundational support for these transitions, you know, and are we doing it quick enough is a real question for our scientists, actually, that we'll be talking later. So this idea of performing what I call dynamic fallowing, using funds for voluntary and temporary fallowing in various locations across the state. I'll use the Middle Rio Grande as an example. If we could get the voluntary participation in a fallowing program, we could use the couple of years that they're rebuilding Alvaro Dam right now under dam safety work. We could use those couple of years while that's occurring to catch up and optimize our deliveries down to Elephant Butte. And I'm sure the Lower Rio Grande folks would thank us for that as well. We got to address infrastructure needs with all the new funding that's coming in. A big challenge. The state is really not geared to it yet. We have some capacity issues that we're trying to ramp up in terms of staffing, reaching out for other opportunities for the private sector to help. I mean, it's an all hands on deck situation in many ways. And the governor's really recognized that in her budget she's issued in terms of adding new support for staffing and other programmatic funding that she's requested in her budget. And so these new funds that are coming in have very strong focus on equity for underserved communities, and that's across the board. And we're the poster child in New Mexico for underserved communities. So I think we can attract and have attracted a lot of funds from the state level. And we thoroughly hope that we can make the maximum use of that. So to do so, we'd have to streamline our state funding mechanisms through review of our current procedures and practices. We've got lots of different funds. We've got lots of different procedures and processes that have bureaucratic red tape that hamper the abilities to get water. Projects for water out on the ground. And obviously, we're working to complete the 50-year water plan. And we're going to vet recommendations and infrastructure priorities through a water policy and infrastructure task force that the governor has authorized me to form. And we're going to work diligently to provide that information and work with all of our partners throughout the state that we asked to participate on this in order to get strong buy-in and strong support for the recommendations that will be coming to the governor and the legislature in the July timeframe in order for the state to be prepared for the 60-day session upcoming. So that's the short term. Longer term actions. I mentioned earlier, we got to provide transitional support to the agricultural community as things need to be scaled, both in the cropping patterns and water use to address kind of our new normal in the agricultural world. The unfortunate nature of even though the folks have senior water use rights, the processes that are involved in the sharing of shortages, the surface water has to take the hit. That's just the nature of the system, the nature of the arid state of New Mexico. So we got to figure out a way to provide good support to the agricultural communities. We got to create manage conjunctive use strategies through administration of groundwater uses. AWORM is a new tool in the toolbox that we need to fully capitalize on for shortage sharing agreements and also as a parallel for Indian water rights settlements. Also, stormwater capture, treatment, and use strategies is very critical. As I understand it, we could be shifting more from a snowmelt runoff scenario into more of a monsoonal driven kind of water supply situation. So we got to figure out how to fully capitalize on that shift in water availability. We need to optimize our reservoir systems. As I mentioned earlier, we've pushed the institutional requirements to the limit. Us water managers are a pretty creative bunch, and we've done a lot of things over the years to push things to the absolute brink of and our learned attorneys get nervous sometimes when we do that, but we push forward nonetheless. So optimizing those systems and possibly rethinking various compact requirements based on the new normals that we're facing is like what's going on in the Colorado River as we speak. And then assure preservation of ecosystems and traditional communities. That's of huge importance to the governor and many of our state participants in this forum and many forums, is that we can't ignore the high ecological values that New Mexico has, and we also need to support our traditional communities to allow for those cultural and traditional practices to continue. It's a unique component of New Mexico, and we certainly want to support that to the fullest. Next slide, please. And here we are, the beautiful Middle Rio Grande Valley. I've spent most of my career, and I live here. We want to maintain this. We want to preserve this as much as we possibly can under the scenarios that we are being painted as a pretty bleak future water-wise, but we have to pull together. And like I said earlier, this is an all hands on deck moment for us. And I'm pleased to be in a position to help as much as I can with my experience and the level of collaboration and the New Mexicans that are in high places in the interior and the Corps of Engineers and other places is going to be a great help with us. We also have a great congressional delegation, and so shame on us if we don't fully capitalize on these opportunities and make the best of it as we prepare for a bit of a drier future. So anyways, I appreciate the opportunity and I'll stand for questions.
Mike, thank you so much. We're so grateful you're in the position you're in, and it's wonderful to hear what you, what you bring to that role and your views. So we're a bit behind. I'm not too worried about that. And we have a couple of questions in the chat I'd like to offer you. The first one is from Zoe Fink. How can we prioritize using our water resources to feed our communities rather than incentivizing fallowing of fields? I hope the 50-year water plan will focus on supporting our farmers, and somebody else offered ranchers, and working towards food sovereignty in the state, and deprioritizing development projects like Santolina and Facebook. Thoughts on that, Mike?
That's a pretty interesting question to tackle. Water policy will be vetted through the task force process with recommendations about prioritizing food production. I think food security is really important. I think locally produced agriculture is the answer to a lot of ecological concerns in the long term. If the Central Valley in California and Imperial Valley in California begin to lose their productivity, I think preserving farmland in New Mexico and the abilities to produce our own food and fiber is important, and that will be a strong component to how we move forward with supporting our agricultural communities. But to pick, how we support development and our growing communities, and to pit that against agriculture is probably not the right approach. I think we need to figure out in the regional context through AWRM how these move forward without, in my view, picking winners and losers, and we certainly don't want to put agriculture in the losing category. The volunteer following is a bridging process that we're proposing during times of shortage, and I call it dynamic following because you can expand and contract. You also support a farmer who could lose his entire crop in the heat of the summer through these processes to keep them whole and keep them vibrant for the time when there is a more available water supply. So that's the overall concept. It's in no way pitting one against the other.
Great, thank you, Mike. I'm going to let you do one more, perhaps it can be quick. And this is from Joe Savage. How are the compacts and potential changes to the compacts built into the 50-year water plan?
Well, the compacts are given. They're a baseline that needs to be in the decision-making process. There will probably be some discussion and some recommendation sections that would review, actually put New Mexico in a much stronger position. Right now, we're feeling like we're behind the curve quite a bit compared to our sister states around us in terms of our capabilities and our technical understanding of things. I think one of the things that the governor has recognized is that fact. Her budget she's offered is trying to correct that in the right direction. But we are behind the curve in that regard to fully defend the state in the compact setting. But we also realize that partnerships with our sister states is very important, because they're going to be in the same boat. They're in the Southwest. They're going to have a declining water supply situation. And the last thing we need is a bunch of litigation on interstate issues like what we're experiencing in Texas v. New Mexico. We need to negotiate. We need to have a more resilient future for all of our dependent communities, whether we're in Texas or New Mexico or Colorado or Arizona, it really doesn't matter. We have to work together to address the climate change shortages that we predict is coming our way.
Great, thank you, Mike. There are a couple other questions in the chat. I'm going to have to move on, but I urge you all to check that out. The chat can become a very lively part of this meeting. So I also want to just urge people to rename yourselves with a full name if you've just got a first name and with your affiliation. If you can fit that in, you go to the little dots that are in the upper right-hand corner of your own screen, of your own face. Go to the bottom and you see rename, and that's how you can do it. And that helps all of us know who's here. So I want to turn to our next focus, and that is equity, justice, and legislative action in times of climate change. Mike spoke of his particular focus, the lens he's using that involves underserved communities and the importance of kind of being the model in that regard for the country, which I think we're very capable of. So we're going to kind of shift in that direction. We're very pleased and honored to have Dr. Carletta Chief with us. She is Associate Professor, Department of Environmental Science at University of Arizona. And Andrea, sorry, it's there's a typo there. Our apologies, Andrea. It's there. We got that. Jeffrey's going to fix it before our very eyes, or at least next time it will be fixed. Great. Andrea Romero is also here, New Mexico State Representative, to give the legislative perspective. So thank you to you both. We are about 15 minutes behind. I'm not going to take that out of your session. So up at the top there, pretend you're looking at 9:45 to 10:30. At 10:30, we will then take our break. So Dr. Chief, I say Carletta because I've known you quite a while. Excuse me, Dr. Chief, so pleased to have you here. Please share your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Lucy. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be here this morning. And it's wonderful to know about this event. I've never been in attendance here, so I'm one of the first timers. So thank you for inviting me here. And I want to also acknowledge all my relatives out there. Torachi nishna do tohana bashishin zaslana dashiche do tachiri dashinale. And I see some of my relatives out there. My little sister, Dr. Tuli Cordova, Jason John of Navajo Water, Dr. Leeper, who used to work there many years ago, my brother Chiliazi. So good to see you out there, and it's good to know you're here with me. So thank you. Today I want to talk about climate change impacts to tribal waters. Next. To Native Americans, water is sacred, and water is tradition. In contrast to non-tribal utilitarian views of water, Native Americans view water as life, and such water is used in ceremony, different purification rituals, other types of religious practices, blessings, and water is used to acknowledge all relations and to recognize the connection with Mother Earth, Father Sky, and the ocean. Earlier, I shared my relations to my relatives, and 3 of my clans are actually water-based. So it's also related to our identities. So water is very important and sacred, and it's represented in many epistemologies of Native American beliefs and views. And for example, in my own tribe, which is the Navajo people, there are two different types of water. There's the male water and the female water. And earlier, the previous speaker was talking about, snow melt runoff changing into monsoonal precipitation. So similarly, Navajos also view water with those different intensities, where male water is represented in the storms and female is represented in the spring showers. So for us, we would be thinking that that transition is more turning into more of a female water entity. So I just wanted to share that perspective. Next. Climate change, its variability is going to result in, as we know, increased temperatures, changes in these precipitation regimes, and increases in extreme events. And these climatic change are going to alter regional hydrology in terms of the quantity, quality, and timing. And not only are these changes going to impact ecosystem changes like habitat loss, altered nutrient cycling, and impacts to species and where they exist, changes in their geographic ranges and population change. But these climatic change also have a really deep impact to Native Americans because of what I was sharing earlier about that deep connection of Native Americans to the water. Next. This warming trend will affect both tribal and non-tribal citizens. However, Native Americans will be impacted differently and more in unique ways. So I represent one tribe. However, I've had the privilege of working with several different tribes, but even as a Native American, I appreciate the diversity of tribes across the United States. And that's one thing I want to relay to the audience here is that there are over 570 federally recognized tribes in the United States, with many more state recognized tribes. And a lot of Native Americans also live on non-tribal lands. So this is a map showing the maroon areas, all of this diversity of tribes across the United States. And you can see, they're spanned across different topographies and ecosystems, from desert terrain to coastal regions to very hot climates to colder climates. So very diverse, not only culturally, but also geographically and climatically. Next. So when I started out my work during my postdoc, which was around 2007, there wasn't a lot of information or work done related to climate change impacts on tribes. And I began to work on this topic in collaboration with tribal members across the United States, particularly through a group called Rising Voices. And these were tribal members and indigenous scientists and friends that were working on this topic. And so we wrote this paper to be a resource to provide that bird's eye view of the impacts to tribal water. So we split up the regions across these 570 tribes outlined in these blue areas. Next. One of the things that we immediately came to acknowledge is that tribes have different factors that need to be considered in the way that they may be vulnerable or how they adapt to climate change. And we looked at this using the hazards and the disaster risk reduction framework that is set in a medicine wheel. So you see this medicine wheel, and the reason why we did a medicine wheel was to emphasize the interconnectedness of these factors, constraining or enabling the tribe's ability to respond to these climate change hazards. So these factors are socioeconomic, political, infrastructural, and ecosystem services and land use, and spirituality and culture. Next. So factors such as community structure and rural urban composition are recognized as components of social vulnerability. So similar to indigenous people around the world, Native Americans in the United States often live in rural communities with smaller populations under lower socioeconomic conditions, and often face political marginalization. And all of these factors impact the ability of the tribal nation to manage their water resources and subsequently respond to climate change impacts. Next. Politically, tribes are sovereign tribes. They have nation-to-nation status with the federal government, which provides them many rights, such as having federally reserved water rights. And some tribes also have privileges for traditional subsistence rights off their reservation. And then many tribes, like a tribe I work with in Nevada, the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe, are often impacted by off-reservation pollution impacts. And oftentimes tribes are underrepresented in management discussions. So an environmental impacts such as climate change become very complex when you begin to mix it in with this legal complex issues that are important to consider. Next. So with climate change, we'll see changes in the water quality, quantity, and its temporal distribution. And some tribal infrastructure may not be designed to accommodate those types of changes, either damaging those physical infrastructure, decreasing their effectiveness, like in Alaska, for example, changes in their water temperature and quality are going to be leading to changes in their water quality, and the water treatment systems that they have may not be designed to treat those waters to a specified standard. So this would result in service disruptions, which could result in economic and public health consequences. For some tribes, water infrastructure may be lacking or inadequate, poorly maintained, and hence increasing the vulnerability to tribal, to climate impacts. Thanks. For many Native Americans, they have subsistence practices that are dependent on the ecosystem, and these are ecosystem services. And this can include fishing, ranching, gathering of medicinal and herbal plants. And with climate change, changing these water distribution is also going to change the ability and stress these ecosystem and and changing the ability of tribal members to access these ecosystem services. Next. So Native Americans are intimately connected to the places in which they live through spiritual and cultural livelihoods and values. And I was pleased to see an announcement earlier, I think it was the end of last year, from Secretary Holland, acknowledging traditional ecological knowledge as a valid data to consider moving forward in terms of management. And I look forward to seeing how that will occur. But there's this knowledge that's held by tribes because they've lived in these places for so long, and that they have used these lands. And so that knowledge serves as a repository of long-term observations of environmental changes that have occurred and adaptation strategies that have occurred. And so this knowledge is useful to extend environmental record where data is sparse in some regions. Next. So I try to give some brief examples of climate change impacts in the Southwest. So in the Southwest, there's about 170 tribes, and tribes engage in ranching, agricultural, mining, tourism, and other economies. And key climate change impacts stem from drought and flooding that affect livestock, agriculture, water supply, water rights, soil quality, and aquatic species. And increasing aridity and drought threaten tribes, pushing them to use marginal resources. But some tribes have been experiencing drought for many decades, and this has led to thus mobility of sand dunes covering homes and infrastructure. And then in some places like with the Wallapai, they've had to sell off cattle because there hasn't been enough water. And then more recently, we've seen a lot of wildfires. So with the White Mountain Apache, all their land is in forested areas. So these are all impacts they're facing now. Next. So one example we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's illustrated a perturbation that has resulted in food, energy, water insecurities. For example, on the Navajo Nation where I work, there's a rural food desert with only 13 grocery stores, and approximately 30% of the residents do not have running water, and 40% lack electricity. And so this results in enormous costs to the Navajo user for a really high cost of water in comparison to nearby cities. So resilience is really important for communities to have for perturbations like climate change or pandemics, so that they can be resilient to the impacts and recover from them. Next. So when we talk about environmental injustice and inequities, there are different ways to think about this, not only in terms of tackling the problem itself and working towards equality, but also the other side is the education and training that is needed to develop solutions and to train people to be adequately knowledgeable to work in Indigenous communities. So here at the University of Arizona, I have a program called the Indigenous Food, Energy, Water Security, and Sovereignty, where I have 38 graduate students. A third of them are Native American, half of them are minorities. And we are training them to understand how to work in Indigenous communities, to understand the governance, the culture, to be respectful, to think about decolonizing Western paradigms in how they develop technical solutions. So one of the challenges we have as engineers and scientists is we develop solutions and then drop it off in the communities without really having trained the community or involve the community. So the work that I do, my work is community driven and community focused, so that I'm invited by the community to work there. And my commitment is to sustain that partnership beyond the grants that's funded. So to develop this workforce, we've been working within the college and training tribal college students and working with them along with the graduate students. Next. So our research theme is to develop novel and sustainable solutions for off-grid production of safe drinking water, to manage brine, and to develop highly efficient control of environmental agricultural systems. Next. What makes this work possible is communication and partnership with our tribal partners, and in this project, it's the Navajo Nation, as well as communicating with other entities that are working with the Navajo Nation. And we were invited by the Navajo Nation to join the Navajo Nation Water Access Coordination Group, whose mission is to identify, acquire, prioritize, and use available resources to increase water for tribal homes. And so it's been a real pleasure and honor to work in this collaborative space and to work on water inequities. Next. One of the ways that we're doing to contribute to community resilience is to pilot off-grid mobile solar nanofiltration systems. This is a water treatment system that sits on a trailer bed, and the water, raw water, is treated using nanofiltration systems and membranes, and it's all powered by solar. We have since downsized this to household unit, and we've piloted and are piloting it in 4 communities on the Navajo Nation. Our project is approved by the Navajo Nation Human Research Review Board. Next. So in conclusion, tribes have an urgent need to prepare for and respond to climate change that considers culture. And a lot of uncertainties exist in model predictions and oftentimes lack community specific data. And so I believe that adaptation strategies to climate change is important and is effective if it's integrated into an existing plan that the tribe already has. You can just flip through the rest of those bullet points. They're animated. And then finally, for tribes who've been left out of these discussions, it's important that adaptation planning be participatory and transparent. Next. So environmental justice and equity can happen when we consider and put the tribe at the forefront to lead the initiative for the community to their priorities be elevated, and that Western paradigms are decolonized in the approach that is taken. Indigenous people are resilient, and have been here through many different perturbations and will continue to be. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to Representative Romero. Go ahead.
Dr. Chief, thank you ever so much. I'd like to just let you answer one question before we go to Andrea. And just, I think it might be a quick one. It's pretty interesting. It's from Nathan Gaudreau, who's a teacher in Albuquerque. Dr. Chief, would you happen to know why tribal land is not designated on US maps as delineated sovereign nations with borders versus areas inside of states? My students are wondering if such a change is necessary or possible, and if it would change the level of attention paid to each nation by the government and other citizens. So that map you showed in the very beginning is a map that we're all familiar with, the United States divided into states and then the tribes superimposed on top of the state lines. This suggestion is the state lines really aren't relevant in terms of sovereignty. Thoughts on that? Oh, let's see, do we need to unmute? I'm sorry. There we go.
Okay,
You're
sorry about
unmuted.
that. Yeah, I was unable to unmute myself. Yeah, that's interesting that that's happening. I think a lot of times there's the full picture is not provided in K through 12 education. I think in the curriculum textbook, my personal opinion, there's a long ways to go with ensuring that there's representation of Native Americans fully and accurately in the curriculum. And I'm saying that as a parent, I'm not embedded in, you know, K through 12 education, except through STEM outreach with Star School that we're doing. But I think that there are resources out there, and unfortunately, I think you'd have to do a little bit more work to include that. Those GIS coverages that I shared are downloadable. If you just go onto the web, you can actually download those coverages for tribes and their boundaries. So
That's
yeah,
great.
so I would just
Yeah.
say, you know, they're out there. It's just have
Good.
take a little
Thank
bit more
you.
work to get them.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Dr. Chief. There's another great question from Kimberly. I think we'll wait and see if we can get to that after we hear from Representative Romero. So Andrea, are you out there? I saw your name. If you want to speak up and come forward, we really
There, I
appreciate
got
your
unmuted.
being here.
Good morning.
Yeah. There you are. Great.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you all. Thank you. Thank you so much for having this today. It's an honor to be here, to be able to talk about some of the equity and legislative opportunity I think that we have both in this coming session and moving forward. And I just want to thank both Mike Hammond for the history and the breadth of knowledge that he brings to the table. Great to have him at the helm with the governor's ear, and to Dr. Chief for being able to platform so much of what we deal with in the New Mexico State Legislature and creating that equity. I have the honor of representing House District 46, which is the northern part of the Santa Fe County, which starts in the city of Santa Fe from the south, goes through the Pojoaque Valley into the city of Espanola. I call it a microcosm of all of New Mexico because we also have 4 sovereign nations in our district as well. Tesuque, Pojoaque, San Ildefonso, and Nambe Pueblos. So as we have heard some of the challenges that we're going through in looking at how we adapt to perpetual drought, and I know that that's an oxymoron. I was corrected by a climate scientist, so I like the persistent drought. I think that fits. But truly, the crisis is here, and I think we have all of the best cast of characters to be able to bring the right policy to fruition. I've been referring to this group as the all-star cast of, if you've seen the movie Don't Look Up, this is the group here with all of the glitz glamour, the perfect cast to talk about the things that we're facing right now in New Mexico. So if I make those references, you're the Don't Look Up crew. the best scientists, the folks who have been caring about this for years and eons, and know what to do. We just need to have the political will to do it. But again, I think we have the opportunity. I jumped into water policy just 2 years ago, trying to look at what beneficial use means. And for you water people, that is a very emotional discussion. That is a very hard topic to address. And that's because water is so important to so many of us. It's our work, it's our play, it's our lives and our livelihoods. And it's also our history, it's our present, and it's our future. And so when we look at the people of New Mexico and that ownership, because it's constitutionally owned by the people of New Mexico, we have to find the right ways to be able to look at what we're doing in the future. And again, we got every sort of curveball thrown at us to just have that conversation. But the reality is we're ready to have it. And so many legislators have this at the top of their list because their communities are going dry. The livelihoods and the incomes of folks they're desperate for answers. And while I think our state has really looked at climate change from an energy perspective, and we've been investing time, money, energy, effort in this energy space, we have an energy transition that's underway, both bought in by the PRC, our courts, et cetera. I think now's the time to create that water space for this transition, elevate it to the levels of what I think energy transition has become in the state, and be able to look at it as something that we, with our burden of climate change being drought, we have the rigor and expertise to be able to create a drought adaptation transition. And I'm hoping that this Don't Look Up crew can create that sort of effort that has gotten the same sort of dynamic interest from all folks from all of the market interest, all of the different growth opportunities in energy for water. So we're here today to basically discuss this most precious resource, and I just want to let folks know that the future of New Mexico is in water. And I think now that we've been continuing to have these conversations in our legislative chambers, how we dialogue is important. And even in this conference alone, I know that Representative Melanie Stansbury, now Congresswoman Stansbury, because of this dialogue, was able to meet some experts to even create the Water Data Act platform because of a sidebar conversation, because of a panel that she attended in order to create that policy. I am not an expert in water. I'm just very passionate about it. You are the experts. We lean and rely on you to tell us what we need to do as legislators. And again, inclusive of all of the different political arms, all of the different historical arms as part of that, because it's such a huge interest. So I noted too that in the poll, there was no one under the age of 25. And I too started too late in water. So I'm hoping that we can get this effort, broadened for the kind of political action and activism I think it requires. But again, constitutionally, the water is ours to solve. And in the Southwest, drought is our burden. And I think we definitely have the opportunity to fix that. Two things that I'll be working on in the legislative session coming up. One is continuing to fund the Water Data Act from the dialogue that was had here, and appropriate accordingly to the different departments that require the funding to continue that. As many of you know, the data that's collected is in different forms and it's translated in different forms. So we want to have a cohesive, unified effort to be able to do that. And thank you to all those who are part of that solution. And two, we've just been given the go-ahead to attempt to update the job description for a new head of the Office of the State Engineer. Currently, the job description is that you just need to be an engineer. And because there are so many other qualities of expertise in water now, we want to bring that into the 21st century as well. And with that vacancy, I think there's an opportunity there to look at the future. So I'll just conclude that if you know a mechanical engineer or rocket scientist in fluid dynamics, they'll tell you that this is so exciting to work in, because fluid dynamics is still one of those places that there's still new information constantly percolating and new discoveries are being made. I think that for me and for so many who are now are working on the policy side of water, and the dynamics are complex and nuanced and challenging. But every single day we're making better progress. And so I hope that you'll join us all in this once in a generation opportunity. I know I'm here for it, and I hope I'm here to stay. If you'll let me keep my seat to continue this work, that's excellent. But I'm just really grateful to be here today and to continue the great work that's carrying the torch, I know, from Representative Stansberry, and moving forth to what we need to do in the future. So hopefully that gets us back on time, maybe. Happy to answer any questions, and thank you all for the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrea. Wonderful to have an advocate like you. Indeed, I hope you stay right where you are and keep advocating. I just want to note that Dr. Chief has taken up the chat and offered some great materials to look at in answer to Nathan's question and others. And there's a good conversation going on in there, so be sure to check that out. And for you, Andrea, there's a question from Lori Wiaki. Is there a way to allow stakeholders to weigh in on the new state engineer? I assume she means appointment of the new state engineer qualifications, whatever. I know tribal leaders are very interested in the new SR. Not sure what. Oh, Andrea, you're on mute. Yeah, do we need to unmute Andrea?
Just got it.
Great.
Yeah, so I think this is the starting point. You know, we were really grateful to the governor's office for, you know, having that conversation as soon as we knew that there was going to be a vacancy, that this is sort of the right time to update that job description before hiring. And we have the 30-day session to attempt that. So any advocates who want to be part of that, especially on building a better job description, I've been looking at old pieces of legislation that have been attempted in the past. So I'm hopeful that, you know, we are going to have those debates and that discussion in the chambers in this 30-day. And I'm happy to send out what we pre-file. I'm hoping to pre-file what we will pre-file or file. I can get to the facilitators here for folks to be in as part of the advocacy groups on updating that. But I think folks that are here are all part of that conversation.
Great. Here, let's just take one more. This is from Joe Savage. You pointed out something very important we need to work on: encouraging, inspiring young people to enter the water business, such as public water system operators.
Agreed. I think that there's just, you know, so much opportunity right now while we have the funds, while we're hiring like crazy. I know even in the Water Data Act space, it's getting tech folks that can work in the water space. So I think there's just an opportunity now for all of the cultural relevance that we've discussed in water, how we turn that into jobs and opportunities. I know I would love to work at the river every day, and I know folks are out there collecting samples and doing that great work. So getting folks, you know, interested and excited about it is part of that process as well, because it's everything. It's tech, it's being in the earth, it's doing that due diligence for water protection and environmental protection. So all of the above.
Great. I'm gonna toss you one more, Andrea, kind of two wrapped up together. What about getting funding from the House and from the Senate to get more money to the state engineer's office, fund replacement positions, et cetera? And is that hard without a state engineer in place?
Not necessarily. I mean, there are challenges. We've just I know that the LFC budget that came out, I believe had a double-digit increase, almost 20% increase in OSC's budget. And I think coupled with that, I know that in the interim, I sit on the Water Natural Resources Interim Committee. We also appropriated an additional $12 million as an interest for this legislative session. So those were endorsed pieces of legislation that already came through. You know, we just want to be able to match the dollar amount with the possibilities of hiring. So we don't want to give too much, too little, and we want them to spend it. So I think there's just a great opportunity now with so many folks interested in, modernizing how we manage water, but also looking at how we can get all of the folks in place to do that work. I don't think the challenges are always there in getting everyone the funding they need. So this is no different.
Right, right. Thank you so much. And again, thank you, Dr. Chief, as well. You're a wealth of information and more is pouring into the chat. So everybody, please check out the chat and follow some of those citations that Dr. Chief is offering. Really wonderful. Thank you to you both. Much appreciation from the dialogue, from your two perspectives and the passion that you both bring. Clearly, you're full of it, and that's a beautiful thing. So we are going to take a break. And I think, let's see, 25, let's make it 25 minutes. I'm trying to make up a couple of minutes here and there. Let's come back at 10:35. Okay, and I would ask you to not leave the meeting. Simply turn off your video if you want, and you're already on mute. So you're good to go, do whatever you need to do, but don't leave. When you come back, we have to readmit you, and it just is kind of a hassle. So if you can not leave the meeting, we appreciate it. And see you at 10:35 Mountain Time.
Lucy, I'm going to do a quick screen sharing test with Amelia here.
Sure.
And maybe Jeffrey, you can help.
Okay, I'm good to go.
You are?
And yeah, let me I just move one screen and hold on just a sec. I've been having a few hassles with my laptop and I just want to make sure this is going to work.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to go to PowerPoint slideshow and say share. And then I'm hoping you can see my screen.
Yes.
Beautiful.
I'm going to go
Beautiful.
to spotlight. And then can you see a red pointer?
We can.
Yes.
Great. And let me just make sure I can change slides. Yes, I can. Okay.
Hey, Nelia. Good to see you. Happy New Year, everybody.
Oh, hey, Rolf, how are you?
Oh, I got roller skates on, but I think. And Sophia and Lucy, Jeffrey, good to see you guys too. I just wanted to weigh in too. My understanding is I'll do like 3 slides intro right at the beginning, hand off to Nelia, and when she's done, I'll have 3 more.
Okay.
And then go
Great.
to Senator. Okay, great. Thanks. See you guys in a few.
Okay.
Good.
Hi, this is Wade. I had a
Yeah,
question,
Wade, hi.
or Lucy or somebody. Used to I could select the chat and then paste it into a Word file or something, and now you can select all, but I haven't been able to, copy and paste it into, my notes or anything like that. Do you know, is there a way to do that? I used to could, but I can't on this version or something. I don't know.
I'm happy to take your question, Wade. Hi, this is Sophia. So we'll be saving the chat, and we can send out all the, relevant links and conversation. Because I've received several requests to do that. But typically, so you're saying you're struggling with a copy and paste process.
Yeah, I can select all in the chat, but then I don't have any options to copy it so I can paste it into my notes.
Are you using a Mac or a PC?
PC.
I'm having the same issue. Thank you for asking, Wade. I'm trying desperately to copy some notes here and it won't work.
Yeah, and I don't see the function that normally you just hit save chat and it will go into a Zoom folder somewhere, but I don't see it.
Sure. Okay, well, I think to if multiple people are having that issue, and I can go into the meeting settings, but we can send out the chat to participants when we're done.
Okay, I am seeing where it will save a file. Like down there on the bottom where you type in a message, the little
Yeah.
page next to the little face, the emoji icon. If you click that, it gives you where you can pull up and put a file name in.
Okay, right.
So-
So I'm just so what I see when I'm in the chat, and this may be different because I'm a host, but right. So you'll see in the middle there's the smiley face, and then to Looker's right there are three dots, and then to Looker's left there's a sticky note, let's call it.
Right.
And so when I click on the three dots, I get an option to save chat.
The three dots aren't there for us.
Yeah,
That's
we don't
the,
have
the
that.
strange thing.
Ah.
I'm
What
used to
about-
the three dots, but the sticky note is there and I haven't tested yet to
So if you-
see. It does say your
Weird
computer,
choices.
that might save it, but it's the missing three dots that are the
Got it.
problem.
Yes, that's
Okay,
the problem. Yeah.
thank you.
I have three dots. I'm a co-host, so.
Right. So I'll fuss around with the settings, but I do believe by clicking the sticky note, that gives you the option to save it to your computer, to Google Drive, etc.
I tried saving it to my computer, but it won't let you pick a file type. So you have these really weird choices like Dropbox or OneDrive, Google Drive. I don't have any of those.
Well, that is a mystery, Layla, that I will I'll work on behind the scenes and see what we can do. But at any case, we will save the chat and send it out to everybody so everyone has the pertinent links and conversation.
That's great. The one thing I did find, though, you can do, if you click on a link in the chat, it will open it up in a browser.
Yes, I did do that.
And so you can save that from your browser, but there's just a little workaround there if you want those links.
I pestered
that
Dr.
works,
Chief
but
for
it's-
those references, so I'm trying to snag
Right.
them.
There is normally, so, and I just looked too and can confirm what Layla was saying, that there doesn't seem to be a way to save the whole chat like there normally is because the three dots are missing and the sticky note doesn't seem to do it. So for those of us who like to occasionally refer back to everybody's comments and the whole dialogue, not just the references, it doesn't look like we have that right now.
Sure.
And if you have it, Sophia, that's great. I wasn't planning on doing it today anyway myself, but it
Yep.
seems like other people might. And then the people who don't like all the comments are going to be saved from the chat either. So that's also something to consider.
Yeah, thanks for your feedback, Sharon. I'm dealing with an urgent issue on the phone, but once I attend to that, I will kind of go behind the scenes and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, Sophia, you go do what you need to do. In any case, Sophia will save the entire chat from the day and email that to everybody that attended. So sooner or later, hopefully sooner, you will get the chat if
Let
it's
me
not
plant
possible
one
to
thought,
do it
Lucy.
yourself.
I've been able to highlight the whole chat, hit a Control-C, and then paste it into a separate Word document.
Oh, aren't you
can't do
clever,
that.
Bob?
I've tried. It won't let you copy the chat. So
It's worked for me in the past with Control-C. I haven't tried.
something different with these settings to keep it more private, I think.
Let me try it right now. Yeah, you're right. It's not copying it on today's Zoom.
I think an older version of the Zoom software allowed that, but this version don't. They must have took it out for privacy reasons or something.
Sophia,
Yes, Paul, it's Lucy. Yeah.
Okay, Lucy, how do
Yeah.
I get logged back in as you requested earlier?
Oh, I mean, you're here, so that's great. What we're trying to avoid is people leaving the meeting and coming back into the meeting. Because every time someone comes back, we have to admit them by hand. So it's a bit of a hassle. And tomorrow, it's going to be really important that people stay logged in. Unless, of course, if the internet drops you, you can't help it. But tomorrow, it has to do with the breakout rooms, the fact that once you are put into a breakout room, in order to get ready for the breakout rooms in the afternoon, Sophia is going to be putting everybody in a breakout room in the morning. You don't know that, that's what she's doing behind the scenes tomorrow. If you, after she's put you in that room, if you leave the meeting and come back, it feels like no big deal to you. For her, she has to put you back in the breakout room. And
So
yeah,
we don't have to log back in as attending, or I didn't
no,
quite
not
catch
at
all that.
all.
Okay,
No,
so I'm
you're-
good for right now. I don't need to log back in.
No, you're here, you're with us, you're one of the
Okay.
family, just, this is great. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So I
And the
will,
Same Zoom link for tomorrow, and once you're logged in, just stay logged in. But if you like want to go have a cup of coffee and, talk to your dog or something, then you would want to put yourself on mute, and maybe you want to turn your video off, but it's up to you. You can just leave it the way it is right now.
okay. I misunderstood what you were talking about earlier.
Oh,
Thank you.
I am not surprised. I am not surprised. I apologize.
All right, I just wanted to make sure that if you need me to put my name back in there, I'd be more than happy to do that, but
Nope, you're good. You're good to go. You look great, sound great. Happy you're here.
would you mind calling my wife and telling her I look great?
I'll put it in the chat. You can show her. Let's see. So we've got one more minute and we will start up. Okay, Paul, it's in there.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, it is 10:35. We've got some more folks coming back. I'm hoping you're all back with us, refreshed, had a little break. And we would like to move to our panel discussion. And this is coming directly from the ISC and as well from our state senator, Liz Stefanik. So the first part of the panel will be Rolf Schmidt-Peterson, director of the ISC, Interstate Stream Commission, and Nelia Dunbar, the director and state geologist, Bureau of Geology and Mineral Sources. So, and then they will have a little show they're going to do together. And then we will have Liz Stefanik. Liz, wonderful to have you here. Really appreciate you taking the time. And hopefully we'll have time for Q&A after that. And then we have a special little thing before our break. And that is hot off the press, the survey from of New Mexico voters on water issues and policy initiatives presented by the Water Foundation. So this is going to be, I think, really fascinating and relevant for all of us. So stick around for that. I'll just move on and say that we'll then have a 15-minute break to grab a lunch if you want. And then we're going to mimic the style of the old water dialogue meetings that happened in person at the Pueblo Cultural Center when we all had lunch at the back of the room and sat at tables of 8 or so. We're going to mimic that. Sophia will create breakout rooms that have about 5 or 6 people in them, and you'll randomly be put into one of those rooms and you can eat lunch together, talk about whatever you want, probably something about water, but basically whatever you want. We'll leave those rooms open for an hour. You can come and go as you wish. We'll be here to put people in the rooms and say goodbye to them if they leave. And then that will be the end of the day. So if I know some of you may have other obligations at lunchtime and not want to participate in our networking lunch opportunity, that of course is completely fine. So let's move to the panel. Rolf and Nelia and Liz.
Thank you, Lucy. I think I'm up first, and
Good.
really honored to be on this panel today with Nelia and Senator Stefanik, and to be able to speak to all of you. And then I really do wish we were able to meet in person, but I think we'll bear with this for one more year, right? And I want to start out by thanking the Water Dialogue and a lot of our other partners in this 50-year plan effort, because without all of you, we would not be getting the kind of input we have been receiving to date. And I'm very much appreciative of that. And I'm looking for, well, that's interesting, Justin's iPad. I'm just confused. Somebody standing up on their desk, I think. For today, my job, I think, is to start out this presentation and then hand off to Nelia. And then I'll come back and say a little bit about resilience surveys and recommendations that we've heard today. But one of the things I wanted to really highlight is that for the breakout tables, particularly tomorrow, I'm going to talk about recommendations a little bit today. Want to impart those to you, and then ask you to think when you're in your breakout tables tomorrow, what's missing? In the things that I've mentioned, which will be somewhat general, what's missing in them, because we would really like to get that type of feedback from you all. With that, Jeffrey, did you have the slideshow? I don't see it. Oh, there he comes. All right, so just to start out, I think many of you were aware I'm Rolf Schmidt-Peterson, the current director of the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission. And within that, have the direction from the governor to oversee, now with Mike Hammond, but also my staff and the Interstate Stream Commission, the development of the 50-year water plan. Next slide. So I wanted to start by saying this 50-year water plan is not the beginning of planning within New Mexico, and it's certainly not the end of it. And we recognize that there are many different planning efforts that have gone across the state or going on across the state, and many of them, in my mind, very forward-thinking and ahead of what the ISC's been able to do. And we're learning from those and grateful for them. But I also wanted to point out, we have the 16 regional plans that were most recently updated around 2017, 2018, and an update to the state water plan that was done in 2018 also. And the next state water plan would be due sometime in late 2023, somewhere around that time period, about every 5 years. This 50-year plan is not the state water plan. It's what you're seeing over here to the left. It's really looking at planning for continued change in New Mexico's water resources due to increasing temperatures from climate change. And the governor's direction to us in that regard was to try to look forward 50 years at what type of changes New Mexico should expect using this science, peer-reviewed science, in order to assess that. Given that information, and New Mexico water users across the state reach out to as many of them as possible, to get their input on their reactions to the science, and then also their impressions or their thoughts on their own resilience in the face of that climate change. And then, from that, work with the water users to develop recommendations about, what's necessary or potentially necessary over the next 50 years to improve resilience across the state of New Mexico. And within that, we have themes from the governor of stewardship and smart water management. And I think this ties to some of the items that Mike Hammond presented earlier today: sustainability across the state and then equity. The next slide on this, please. So we could not even have gotten close to approaching where we're at without all of the partners that have been involved in this experience. And I would say it's actually part of our intent to not do just another kind of a document that might have a lot of facts in it, but perhaps maybe not be as meaningful across the landscape of New Mexico and to New Mexicans as we would want it to be. And in that regard, for a number of reasons, we've reached out to multiple partners. You'll be hearing here in a moment from Nelia on the science piece of the Leap Ahead. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate the efforts of the Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources and the volunteer research experts that brought really 30 years of peer-reviewed experience in general to the table for that report that they've developed. The water dialogue that I mentioned at the beginning, and today's meeting, a meeting last year, and your involvement on your executive board all through the year, very much appreciated. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and their planning assistance to the state, bringing valuable resources to the table. The New Mexico Water Resource Research Institute, with their various efforts from the statewide water budget, and also to this last year's WRRI annual meeting, very much appreciated. New Mexico Department of Indian Affairs and the Tribal Work Group and all of the different tribal leaders in that. I'm honored to be part of that process, I have to say, and we're receiving some very interesting input from it. We have also received a tremendous amount of support from other state agencies that are on the front lines, actually, in some other areas with regards to climate change initiatives, particularly on the action part of that, more so than the mitigation piece. And that would be the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department, the State Forestry, New Mexico Environment Department, New Mexico Department of Ag, and Department of Game and Fish. And then finally, for today and the other piece is all of you. You are the people with the boots on the ground expertise in managing water, because in reality, New Mexico isn't a top-down, down-driven type of process with water management. There are some layers to that, federal and state and tribal and others, but it's the water users on the ground, the acequias, the community ditches, the conservancy districts, irrigation districts, cities, mutual domestics. That's where really the rubber hits the road in doing this, and we want to learn and listen to you. Jeffrey, with that, I think I'll hand off to Dr. Dunbar. Dr. Dunbar, you're going to run your own slide?
Yes, good morning. My name is Neely Dunbar, and I'm the director of the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources, which is New Mexico's state geological survey. We are a non-regulatory agency, and we are part of New Mexico Tech. And again, I'd like to thank the New Mexico Water Dialogue for inviting me to participate today. Okay, so let me share my screen. And I'm hoping people can see my screen at this point. Could someone nod?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, great. And then I'm also going to turn on my pointer. And I'm hoping people can see a red pointer on the screen now as well.
Yes, yep, I see it.
I'm going to start my timer so as to be respectful of everyone's time.
Great, thank you.
And thanks, Rolf, for the nice introduction to what I'm going to be talking about this morning, which is an assessment of the impacts of climate on New Mexico's water resources over the next 50 years. And I also appreciate Mike Hammond giving a nice summary of some of the findings in this report. Rolf and I were students at New Mexico Tech many years ago, and I was really happy when he reached out to us to help develop the scientific foundation for the New Mexico 50-year water plan. And I think this is a really nice example of a collaboration between two state-funded agencies, the Office of the State Engineer, the Interstate Stream Commission, and the Bureau of Geology, which is a state agency, but again, a non-regulatory group. So why do we need this? Why do we need to develop a scientific foundation for the 50-year water plan to allow us to assess something about how climate and water resources in New Mexico are going to be changing over the next 50 years? And I think the answer to that is straightforward. Mike touched on it earlier this morning. Probably all of you were aware of this, but fundamentally, New Mexico's climate is warming. And a new 50-year water plan for the state must account for ongoing and future changes to our climate and to our water resource reliability. So the graph that you can see on your screen here, let's focus on the upper part of the graph first. This is an instrumental record of average temperature in New Mexico since 1931 and stretching to 2020. Each of the red dots on this screen show an average annual temperature for New Mexico. And what I would like to point out to you is that there have been, since the 1980s, the red lines here show decadal averages of average temperature in New Mexico. And you can see that since the 1980s, there's been a stepwise increase in average decadal temperature in New Mexico. This is quite a straightforward and robust trend that we're seeing. So again, decadal average temperatures have been climbing steadily over the past 50 years in New Mexico. The lower part of this graph shows exactly the same type of information, but is focusing on precipitation instead of temperature. And the first thing I'd like to point out is there's tremendous variability from year to year in precipitation in New Mexico. But unlike what we're seeing for temperature, the decadal averages of precipitation in New Mexico have not been changing. They haven't been going down, which is good news, but they also have not been going up. There's no significant trend in those data. However, again, I'd like to emphasize that the year-to-year variation in precipitation in New Mexico, average precipitation in New Mexico, is tremendously variable. And 4 of the 5 driest years since 1930 have taken place in the past 2 decades. So we know that New Mexico's climate is now warming, and we can also say with quite high certainty that New Mexico's climate will continue to warm in response to increasing concentrations of atmospheric greenhouse gases, as Mike Hammond mentioned in his introduction. So I'm showing you in the diagram you can see here on the screen what we can infer about how future temperature in New Mexico will continue to rise. So this graph shows the time frame from 1900 to 2100. And in the orange here is the instrumental record, basically what I showed you in the last slide. But what I'm showing you additionally here are projected temperature changes in New Mexico going forward to the year 2100. And there are 2 different scenarios here. Both scenarios involve increasing atmospheric CO2, but the red band is an estimate at a higher level of CO2 increase. The green band shows increasing CO2, but at a somewhat lower rate. So in either of these scenarios, we see that temperature in New Mexico is likely to continue to increase going forward. And one of the things Dave Gutzler, who's on this call, who's a great participant in this process, wanted me to point out, which I think is something that's worth mentioning, is the idea of new normal. The idea of things plateauing and kind of becoming a new stable normal is maybe not the way to think about things. I think what we're seeing here is the new normal is that things will change, will continue to change. Okay, so, oops. So as Rolf mentioned, he reached out to the Bureau and asked us to think about assessing the state of knowledge of climate change and impact on water resources in New Mexico and developing a review report that would synthesize the state of existing knowledge. So he tasked me with doing that, and I was enthusiastic about this. I think it's really important for the state of New Mexico. And I was able to assemble a team to work together of a number of scientists who have focused their entire careers in New Mexico and had a range of expertise that provided lots of different facets of the question that we were addressing. So the people who were involved in this report, first were Dave Gutzler, who's an emeritus climatologist from University of New Mexico, Fred Phillips, who's an emeritus hydrologist from New Mexico Tech, Craig Allen, who is a retired ecologist who spent his career working with the United States Geological Survey, mainly, Dave Dubois, who is at New Mexico State and is the current New Mexico State climatologist, Phil King, who's a retired civil engineer from New Mexico State, who spent his career working on water resources in New Mexico, Les McFadden, a retired scientist from UNM who focuses on soils, which are an important part of this equation, Bruce Thompson, who is a retired environmental scientist engineer who spent his career at University of New Mexico, and Ann Tillery, who is a surface systems specialist who thinks about how landscapes evolve in response to climate change and other factors. So the ground rules of the study were to assess and synthesize the recent peer-reviewed scientific literature on climate hydrology and impacts of these changes on water resources. And some of the topics that we worked on were future climate projections, changes to the surface water budget, ecological dynamics, landscape change, fires, and erosion. And as anyone who listens to the news knows, fires are a huge part of the climate change situation that we're dealing with here. There's places that are seeing, like Colorado, fires in the winter. Bad fires in the winter. And as people will recognize, when you modify the ecosystems of high areas in New Mexico with fires, there's landscape change and erosion that's related to that. Another really important topic, and one that I'm going to touch on a little bit more later, is extreme precipitation and flooding. This is going to be a big part of the equation. Thinking about this is a big part of the equation going forward. Soils, of course, are important, as is water supply and water quality, as Carlotta Chief touched on earlier. So the process, this has been actually a very fast process. There's been a lot of effort that's gone into this. We really started this process less than a year ago. This panel began to convene in March 2021. And we had a series of pretty intense meetings to outline the report chapters, discuss each chapter focus, and then talk about ways in which the different chapters interrelated and how the different team members' expertise could come together. Chapters were then written, and there was an internal review by other team members, as well as the 3 study authors. Then in summer 2021, we identified 5 scientists, 4 from New Mexico and 1 from Arizona, who are all experts in different elements of the work we put together in this report. They provided independent, critical peer reviews of the entire study document, and were able to point out maybe things we've missed or things that they thought should be added in. In August 2021, each author presented outreach and education webinars on their chapters with Q&A sessions. And the authors also during this time responded to the peer review comments. These webinars with the associated Q&A sessions are available through the ISC website. So if any of you want to see more information on any of the chapters, that's a great place to start. In September and October, the report was released and open for public comment. And then during this fall, we modified the report to respond to public comments. and we posted a revised version of the report at the beginning of December. And if any of you want to get to this, I was thinking about putting the web address, but just Google New Mexico Climate and Water Resources, and that will take you right to it. And then ongoing, our outreach and education, part of which I'm doing today. And then we're also in the process of thinking about adding an extra chapter focusing on rivers. So now this is a long report. It's complicated. There's a lot going on in it. And I'm just going to touch on a few high points. First, the main message is New Mexico is warming everywhere. So temperatures across the state will rise over the next 50 years between around 5 and 6 degrees. There's a little bit of variability in how temperatures are projected to rise in different parts of the state, but essentially temperature will be rising everywhere. What will happen to precipitation? I showed you this in an earlier graph, and this is another version of that same information, where the line here shows the projected average precipitation going forward. The good news is that precipitation doesn't appear to be going down. However, because of increasing temperature, New Mexico, even with uniform precipitation going forward, New Mexico will become more arid because the atmosphere can absorb more moisture when it's warmer. So even uniform precipitation results in a more arid future for New Mexico. Extreme precipitation, this was something we thought about a lot in this report. And based on increasing atmospheric moisture due to warmer temperatures going forward, more extreme precipitation events would be expected. However, the record of precipitation in New Mexico over the past 20 years is notably variable. So it is hard for us to robustly, statistically project future behavior. The image I'm showing you here, just focus on the state of New Mexico, shows what's called probable maximum precipitation, which is the amount of rain that can fall in a 10 square mile local storm in a 6-hour precipitation event. And the reason I'm showing you this is already, in present day, there's a huge amount of variability in the amount of precipitation that might fall in different parts of New Mexico. And this is likely to become even more extreme going forward. And as Mike touched on in his presentation earlier this morning, this does offer a planning opportunity in New Mexico, starting to think about trapping that precipitation, putting it to beneficial use, and also equally important, thinking about how to armor infrastructure in New Mexico to avoid damage from large precipitation events. Another topic that was thought about a lot in this report is the land surface water budget in New Mexico's arid climate. And I thought this was really interesting. I'm going to give you a summary of the land surface water budget in New Mexico and then talk about how warming climate will impact that. So these arrows are representing what moisture pathways in New Mexico. So in an average year in New Mexico, we might get 95 million acre feet per year of precipitation that falls across the state. A huge amount of that precipitation is transpired by plants or evaporated from soil. So of that 95 million acre feet of precipitation, about 75 million acre feet is transpired from plants. And another 17 million acre feet is evaporated from the land surface of New Mexico. So those two terms together are a huge proportion of our total precipitation in a given year, leaving very small amounts to percolate through soil and rock in New Mexico to recharge our groundwater aquifers or to run off into streams and rivers. And why that's important is as the atmosphere warms, the transpiration and soil evaporation terms will go up, leaving an even smaller amount of water to recharge aquifers or to run off. Okay, I'm getting close to the end of my time. So I'm going to touch briefly on the summary chapter of the report. And some of the public comments said, the report is fairly long and dense. If you want to read one chapter to give you a picture of what's going on, you can focus on chapter 10, which is the summary chapter. New Mexico is a topographically complicated state. And the colored map you see in the lower right shows elevation differences from northern mountains in New Mexico down to Carlsbad area in the southeast part of the state, tremendously topographically variable. And if we were in a much flatter state and we're thinking about how climate might affect different parts of the state, we might have split New Mexico up longitudinally. But because of this big elevation difference, when we were thinking about parts of the state that were going to be impacted by certain elements of climate change and therefore water resources, we lumped regions of the state based more on elevation than on longitude. So this is what we came up with. We focused on what the dominant impact of increasing temperature on water resources, how that would be variable across different parts of the state. And we lumped the state into 4 regions. First is the high mountains, and this includes the Southern Rocky Mountains in northern New Mexico, down to Mogollon area to the west of the state, and also the Sacramento Mountains in the southeast. The second area is the Northwest High Desert, which is the San Juan Basin area. The third part is the Rio Grande Valley and the Southwestern Basins, and the fourth part is the Eastern Plains. So the dominant impacts by region, the high mountains, they will be the most impacted part of the state by climate change. But the impacts in the high mountains will be felt throughout the state. There'll be less snow melt and higher evapotranspiration in the mountains. And then there'll also be changes to plant communities and of course, increased wildfire, which will be felt not only in the high mountains, but will be felt in all the downstream areas. In the Northwest High Desert, a big impact will be loss of soil. There's fragile soils in the Northwest High Desert. These soils can be impacted by increasing temperature and extreme precipitation. This will lead to increased dustiness, possible increased arroyo incision, and also possible transition from grasslands to shrublands. There's really only one paper that focuses on this, so there's a bit of a tenuous conclusion. Typically, shrubs use less water than grasses, so if there were transition from grass to shrubs, it might mean a little more water available to recharge. In the Rio Grande Valley Basin and Range, there will be lower river flows. That's a big impact. And the projections are that the flow in the Rio Grande will be 25% lower in 50 years on average than it is today. And there will also be changes, as Mike touched on, there'll be changes in timing of runoff, which will be trending earlier. There'll also be greater loss of water from reservoirs. And with a 5-degree temperature increase, Elephant Butte will lose to evaporation 2 additional acre-feet of water per year. The Eastern Plains will be probably the most impacted by possible extreme precipitation events, also by loss of soil and increased desertification, and also increased dustiness. Now, the final chapter of the report focuses on data gaps and research directions. And I see I'm already a couple minutes over time, so I think I will end there and direct people to chapter 11 of the report if they're interested in knowing a little bit more what we can do in the state from a research perspective and also an observational data perspective to help better understand what we're looking at in the next 50 years. So I'll end there. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Nelia. Thank you so much. And I noticed in the chat that Kate Lacey has put a link to the report. So anybody can click on that link, save it, and have all of that valuable stuff you've been telling us about. Really, really impressive, sobering, and good to have as real a picture as we can have. Let's see. So Rolf, is it going back to you at this point?
Yeah, I'm back for a few minutes, Lucy. And how much time do I have? I just want to kind of make sure.
Well, I want to be sure we give Liz good time. I think we're fine. How about, I don't know, 10 minutes? Would that?
Oh, that's perfect. I can do that.
Okay.
Yeah. And so Jeffrey, if you could put up the next slide that actually had some text on it, I'll start from there. But before I do, I just wanted to put something into perspective for everybody that's listening today with regards to actual kind of water use or consumption. Dr. Dunbar-Nelia talked about an additional 2 acre-feet per acre use of water off of Elephant Butte Reservoir. And I, just because of my experience previously on the Rio Grande, I was thinking, well, what is that in a full pool at Elephant Butte Reservoir? How much water is that? And basically that would be about 80,000 acre feet of water, additional water lost off of Elephant Butte Reservoir if the reservoir were full, which is a really large amount of water for this river system. It's more than the city of Albuquerque, the water authority, utilizes in a full year. So just to kind of tie that in about the type of impact that we're really looking at from these increasing temperatures from climate change. That's just one example. And I think it's an important one to kind of impart in as I go into this next phase of discussion. And I wanted to bring up really two things right now to set the stage for the table talks later on. And so one, when it comes to resilience and looking at the Leap Ahead analysis, the ISC and our staff and contractor teams did outreach, with webinars for 5 different sectors of water use. One of those sectors was wildlife and our watersheds and habitat, which includes rivers, by the way. Another one was recreation and quality of life, irrigated agriculture, and public water supply systems, and then mining, utilities, and so on. 5 different sectors, 3 of which, the 3 that I mentioned are the water right piece of the sectors, farming being the larger component, and then public water supply systems, the next, which is significantly less, and then also the mining, utilities, and so on. In the order that I just listed those, is our understanding of the impact of these increasing temperatures and how they'll be felt. And I think it makes a lot of sense as I've thought about it a little bit more, but I wanted to get your all's reaction to it too in the chat and maybe even in the discussion pieces. We're already seeing upland watershed changes, significant ones, from fire, tree die-off, and mortality that we're all experiencing around us. And the Los Conchas fire and a number of other places are examples of that. Where I live in Santa Fe, if you look right behind my house now to the hillside, there's a section there where the Piñon have gone through a second phase of die-off in the last 20 years. And it's pretty stark to look at. That's happening around us all the time. And as Nelia mentioned, that's where we anticipate some of the largest impacts from climate change and increasing temperatures. That then translates to our rivers, which translates to our recreation values and quality of life, for things that people value. These are all things that are part of our water system, but not really part of our water right system. And I think we've heard from many people in responses about the value systems and the kind of feeling, emotional pieces of that, but this legal separation between those natural parts of the system and the water parts of the system are pretty distinct, and the impacts from climate change, I think, are starting to really pop out from us in this analysis. The irrigated ag, particularly irrigated ag that is entirely surface water dependent, is probably the next area with most significant change currently and additionally. And that's a lot of our acequias and community ditch organizations and subdivisions, political subdivisions across the state. Large scale irrigated agriculture, probably second in that, unless you really have a really viable groundwater supply like Pecos Valley Artesian Conservancy District. And then public water supply systems and domestic wells come in, really kind of down that road of risk, but where their vulnerabilities are largely less than the other ones that I framed. And that's because of the activities of multiple parties to help to improve resilience even today with the 20 years of drought we're facing. But when you look at those areas, you generally see, domestic wells, particularly in areas with small aquifer systems that are alluvial, perhaps very much tied to surface water recharge in any one year. Those places that being at risk, or public water supply systems that are dependent on, small ones, maybe 1 or 2 wells, and the ability to maintain them. At the same time, we see for other parts of our public water supply systems great resiliency and a lot of planning that's gone in place to provide that. And I'll provide maybe 3 quick examples of that I think you all know of. Albuquerque Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority with its 100-year plan, and San Juan Chama Water, City of Santa Fe with county with Buckman Direct Diversion and their diversification efforts in that regard. And then I would also call out the San Juan Water Commission in the Farmington area, with which Aaron Chavez, who's the president of the Water Dialogue, is the executive director for. But with the Animas La Plata project and their planning pieces, they have many of the components in place that they need to not just be resilient today, but into the future. So I wanted to highlight those 5 areas, tell you a couple of things about them, and then let you think about those for the roundtable discussions a little later on. Next slide, Jeffrey. And then I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we've heard so far. And I hope this will be helpful. And Lucy, just cut me off or tell me when I've got maybe no more time left.
No, you read my mind, Rolf, you read my mind. How about 2 more minutes?
Okay, great. Well, I got 5 pages here. We got about 1,500 separable comments from parties in our outreach efforts. I'm happy that we got those. And they came around governance and policy, compact issues, a little bit of what some of the questions were from Mike Hammond, improving flexibility for transfer of water rights, and in some cases, competition with that to decrease flexibility in doing that, reduce water demand, across all sectors, really with this idea, for public water supply, agriculture, hard rock mining, oil and gas and others, reduce the water use per unit of output. So try to, in that framework, developing environmental flow programs, metering and monitoring all uses, enact taxes that go to, I would say, the direct action activities of carbon taxes, grass taxes, ideas about mitigating climate change with greenhouse emissions, multiple recommendations about increased funding to support water supply systems. And it was kind of interesting. Yeah.
Rolf, I'm sorry, I've got to interrupt. I just have learned my fault. I apologize that Liz is going to have to leave in about 20 minutes. So,
I'll stop right here.
Let's stop right here. Turn it over to Liz. Liz, thanks so much for being here. Sorry if I'm cutting your time short. Much apologies.
Not at all.
Great. Thanks, Rolf. Appreciate it. Liz, please.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And first of all, I want to thank Rolf and Neela for all of their expertise and skill that they're bringing to this process. And this is a complicated process, not just policy-wise, but also through values. And it is ultimately the individual values of the state legislators that is going to determine if we, in fact, change things for the future. And so I think that I was going to touch on the climate and some of the comments that came out for legislative change, but our speakers are already covering that. So what I want to do is put this into context. Several years ago, New Mexico First did a water dialogue. And some of you might have attended that water dialogue. And in it, we actually came out at the end with supposedly a consensus. And we did not have a consensus about the priority use of water. So there was a majority vote that was reported out. And it took 75 to 80% to create a majority vote on that since it was not consensus. Now, to my shock and dismay, the people who attended, and there were well over 100 people over 2 or 3 days, economic development came out number 1. Safe public drinking water didn't come out until number 3. And in our day and age, we need to be looking at what is wrong with New Mexico and our communities if in fact we cannot ensure that people have safe drinking water from a public source. And I know that we are working on this, but even with all of the infrastructure dollars that are coming through, even though we are talking a good talk, it's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen quickly. And here's some of the reasons why. I represent 6 counties in my Senate district. In one of my Senate districts, there is a very small town that is on the border of 2 counties that has very few people living in it. And their water lines were built many, many years ago. And their water lines have asbestos and lead. And because it only has a few hundred people living and drinking water from that water system, it has not been deemed important enough to spend a few $1 million to put in new water lines. That's one example. We have contaminated wells all over the state. We have communities that don't even have water lines going near them. And even if there's money to put water lines out to reservation areas, is there the political will to do it? So there are many conditions that go along with safe public drinking water. The other area that was put down very low on the list of priorities was rural ag, farming and ranching. And when you look at the cultural traditions of our state and what is the basis of some of our traditions here in New Mexico, that is very important. And even if it's only important to a small percentage of the people who live here, it is the small percentage that were here before we got here. And I would bet that many people who are on this Zoom, not all, but many people who are on this Zoom moved here. We moved here, whether it was 40 years ago or 100 years ago or 150 years ago, we weren't here from the beginning. And so I would suggest that we are very diverse in our opinions, not just in the entire state through the surveys, but also among the 112 legislators. So as I was reading through some of the recommendations that came out of the surveys, I looked at what will fly in terms of having enough votes to move something out of the Water and Natural Resources Interim Committee, what will fly out of Senate Conservation in order to make these recommendations really happen. And I suggest that many of them are very important. And if we're looking to the future of our state, we do in fact need to change the use it or lose it. We need to change the priority list. We need to think about whether fallowing land is good or not. And it's very interesting because when I talked to a couple of my colleagues across the aisle about fallowing land, there actually was a comment that they didn't want to be on the public dole. And that's what it would be, public dollars paying people not to use water. And that goes against their grain. That goes against what they stand for. So in all of these recommendations, I want to suggest that the political side to this has to be understood through where the individual comes from, what their values are. it's very interesting. I and Representative Gail Armstrong are going to be on a water dialogue for a group next week. And she readily agreed. And she and I have conversations all the time that differ from each other, but we respect each other so we can have those conversations. Now, in my district is mostly rural. So my district has land grants, it has acequias, it has farmers, it has ranchers. Some of my ranchers and farmers are actually selling the land or leasing the land for solar and wind because they're hoping that their children will in fact take over and stay on the land. And so their children are going off to community college to learn everything they need to come back and manage the projects that are on the family land. But for some of our farmers and ranchers, they really want to continue carrying on the tradition of their families, carrying on the tradition of the state. And that is sometimes not compatible or simpatico with the loss of water, the climate change. Now, I believe this is very interesting. We've had more and more people accept climate change as a term. In just a few years ago, there was a major fight. More and more people are accepting that our environment and our climate is definitely changing what is happening in our state. And our state is becoming arid. Now, I also have been given recommendations. And when Speaker Egoff held a climate workshop or environmental climate conference earlier this year, or in 21, I had an elder Navajo sitting behind me who passed me a note. And he said, "Why aren't we doing desalination?" He said, "Why aren't we looking to other solutions for where we have no water?" There has been a very a yin and yang to use of produced water. There has been a step back from the high energy projects of desalination. But if we have small communities in our state that are already trying a project like that, if we have a neighbor state next door that's saying, we know it's super expensive, but we're going to start planning this. When I go to other countries and they already have this in place, why are we not learning from those around us? And I believe that our experts at geology and the tech and in the Interstate Stream Commission and the Office of State Engineer, they have great ideas, but they're not always accepted by the policymakers. And sometimes we don't fund them enough. And I'm working on that, and so are several other legislators this next session, going to try to make sure that ISC and OSC have enough money to carry out this plan, to put in enough staff. But there is a lot of pushback. So what I am saying in these few minutes that I have with you all is you need to get involved politically. If there's something that comes out of this water plan in terms of recommendations that you really want to see happen, you need to start talking not just to your friends in the legislature. You need to start talking all around the state to all legislators. And so please remember, there are many of us who want to make sure that our state continues to thrive and that all populations in our state are considered. We went through a very contentious redistricting special session in the Senate just in December. And a lot of the discussion was about cultural and racial separation, white, Anglo, and Hispanic and Native American. We also talked about the progressives and the conservatives and the moderates. We also talked about urban versus rural and suburban. And suburban just kind of gets swept under the rug. So we have many divisions in our state that comes through our legislature. And we need to be able to work together, but when we dissolve into disputes, that doesn't allow us to come together. So one thing we want to do is make sure that we bring reasoning, not hot emotion, not anger, but reasoning to the table as we convince legislators to adopt some of the recommendations that will be coming out of the final plan, to listen about the climate and the changes in our state based upon the climate. And I really want to again thank Ralph and Nelia for all of their research and their work and going around the state and getting everybody involved. The Water and Natural Resources Committee did hear about climate and about water and many of the different aspects, not only while we were out in Gallup, but also down in Corona at the livestock farm or the research farm and in some other areas. We try to put water on the agenda every single month because we recognize how important it is. Please stay in touch with your legislators and let's give as much support as we can to the people who are doing this good work. I'm sorry, I'll stay on a few minutes to hear the further discussion, but then I have to get off because I'm a speaker at another event. Thank you so much.
Understood, Senator. Thank you ever so much for being on. You're getting rave reviews in the chat. And it would be great if I could give you one, maybe two quick questions from the chat. One is from Martha Graham. She points out that 91% of New Mexico's public water systems serve fewer than 5,000 people each. And she's questioning the appropriateness of surveying that group with surveys or kind of large scale dialogues that they get lost. Their voice is not heard at the level that it should be, considering that they're 91% of the public water systems. She mentions the survey that was sent out in connection to the 50-year water plan, and also the kind of the large scale dialogues that you talked about. Any thoughts on other ways to get those voices included?
Yes, great point. The small mutual domestics oftentimes do not have their own infrastructure. They have aging infrastructure. They oftentimes have volunteers or one part-time staff person trying to run a system. So one of the things we have done is the legislature has appropriated funds to the Office of State Engineer to assist some of these small mutual domestics with technical expertise in moving forward on water projects. But even more than that, more than just money, we are looking at how to support regionalization of some of these small mutual domestics and how we can group different entities together so that they in fact can lean on each other, support each other, and have a water source when the pipes go down. I have a group up in San Miguel County, and I wasn't very familiar with their exercise, and they came to me a couple of years ago, along with the other legislators from the area, and they said, we are putting together this regional system with water systems from, I don't know, it was 4 or 5 different communities, but the 4 or 5 different communities were very far apart. And they were over hill and dale and a few mountains. And I didn't quite understand how it was going to be accomplished. And so I sat and I learned what their vision was and how they were getting the technical assistance from an engineering firm to actually try to connect the different water systems, not make one water system, but to connect them so that in fact, when one shut off, they could still send water to that community. I know Senator Peter Wirth and Representative Susan Herrera are going through this discussion right now. And I also know Representative Susan Herrera, I don't think she's on your agenda, but she and her family have been without water for several months. because everything went out. I live in an area down Highway 14 south of Santa Fe City where I have wells all around me going dry. My well is over 700 feet deep. I also share my well with a neighbor, but other people, well-known people in the community, are on their third, maybe fourth well. And if you've ever dug a well, you know how expensive it is and that most people cannot do it. Most people don't have the resources to even blow out their pipes or to put in a new pump. So we also have a situation of when people move to rural areas, they think it's so beautiful, but they don't really catch on all the responsibility that goes with it. The septic, the well, the roads, the utilities, etc.
Great. Thank you, Senator, so much. If I could get one more quick one in, this is from Kimberly Caputo. How can we protect our groundwater? This may be a very quick answer. How motivated is the New Mexico legislature to remove the gas and oil industry in our state in order to protect water quality?
The state is not interested in removing all oil and gas until the revenue is replaced. And right now, renewable energy would not replace enough of the financial resources that's coming out of oil and gas. And oil and gas revenue is going into our permanent fund. And so we need to be able to replace that, or we're going to travel backwards to several years ago when we were just scraping the barrel in terms of keeping not just state government going, but any services to cities, counties, communities. Now, you might say, let the cities and counties be on their own, but you need to remember that we have some counties in our state that well, before the federal infrastructure and the ARPA funds, before that, they were pretty destitute. They were almost bankrupt. So we can't ignore what our local communities need. We need to help support them. So I think there's an interest in transitioning to renewables, but we have to look at the resources.
Understood. And that kind of balance is the challenge I know that you face. Senator, thank you so much. Thanks for squeezing us in here. And I know you need to jump off and get onto another Zoom. So
well, thanks. And I'll listen as much as I can while I'm
great.
getting it together. Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Rolf, I will turn it over to you. I interrupted you mid-sentence. So if you want to take a couple of minutes to finish up, and then we can take questions. I'd like to be ready at 11:55 or even sooner if possible for that survey from Nina Karanko of the Water Foundation. But let me give the rest of the time to you folks and to our participants to ask questions.
Great. Well, thank you, Lucy. And so, I'm just kind of reacting a little bit to a couple of the chats, and just from my 30-some years of water management experience in New Mexico, there really is a difference between how Senator Stefanik brought up what some other states are doing and how they look at water and how New Mexico does. And I'm not saying this, it's just kind of more of like a fact of what I've experienced in this regard than a value statement about it. For most of the other states around us, what I've perceived is they value water from almost an entirely economic standpoint when I deal with them. And you see that with Arizona, and I think some of you might have seen the press from the governor of Arizona, Governor Ducey, committing $1 billion in Arizona to a desal project, apparently from the, somewhere in the Baja in Mexico, to supply water to Arizona. And and it's very much driven by, this is the value of water. You know, you go down to San Diego and you deal with them, we'll pay $3,000 an acre foot for water and we won't blink to do that. Well, that's more expensive than the water in Santa Fe, which is otherwise some of the most expensive municipal water anywhere that I know of in the United States. And that leads back to, you know, this idea of, so what do we value and how much do we value it from a monetary standpoint? And desal comes into play in that regard for New Mexico as a whole, because we do have brackish water resources. We do have produced water in a number of areas. Many of those areas relatively distant from, you know, municipal, entities and entities that actually have some reliable supplies. But, you know, if you're looking at irrigated agriculture, you're talking about $100 an acre foot or less for much of New Mexico when it comes to what they would consider to be a burden they could bear to pay for water, unless maybe you're in the lower Rio Grande and Elephant Butte Irrigation District or pecan growers and that type of thing, which is, you could double that maybe or a little bit more. For a city, I mentioned, you know, Santa Fe, a little over $2,000 an acre foot. Well, the last that I heard for desal, and particularly if you think about Israel, I mean, Israel is making decisions from a strategic standpoint for the nation to protect them from on a war footing, you know, almost across the board. And so water for them is almost of prior, you know, the most important value, and the monetary part of that doesn't matter so much. But if you're looking at desal from an ocean or stuff, you might be talking $30,000 an acre foot, maybe $10,000 or $15,000 an acre foot. Otherwise, when we think about that from the issues across New Mexico and what people actually can bear and pay, is pretty darn expensive. And I think that that's one of the reasons we haven't really seen those types of projects move forward. Because, you know, right now, people can still get water in many areas for much less money than that. Just a kind of a, you know, insight for me over the last 30 years of experience. Now, the desal work has been going forward. There's been improvements of that. The prices likely have come down on some of those. I haven't seen the most recent information, but it's something we're trying to gather as part of this 50-year plan process. But Lucy, I'll just take a couple minutes and go to questions. I wanted to hit on the recommendation piece, and you know, we're trying to work to get our arms around all of it, and it's actually turning out to be a little bit more difficult than I expected, and I think that that's in part because of the nature of the remote process, the Zooms, the GoToMeetings, and our platforms to some degree. But for a lot of the comments we've gotten, they've been very thoughtful, and I want to thank everybody for providing that input to us in that regard. But it's not the same as meeting in person and being able to gather information. It's interesting. When I hear from Nelia and the research experts and I see what they talk about, I make for myself what I consider to be logical leaps and from what they're saying to what I do, and it alarms me. I just, you know, for the future and for a number of parts of New Mexico, it really is alarming. But I think when it comes to the responses we've received so far, I don't think we've heard from anybody that said they weren't concerned. But at the same time, we haven't really heard that same kind of idea of alarm. And I've been kind of wrestling and talking with my staff about it, and we're looking to do a little bit more outreach. But I think what we hear is much more of a concern. Yes, we realize change is happening around us. We need to get prepared for us, provide us options, or, you know, we've got to do these bigger things and just change maybe a lot of what's going on. I think there's a gap there, and it's a gap that Dave Gutzler has identified for me in the past too. And it's this aspect of how do we bring more of that increased temperature, climate change science with water closer, from a 10,000 foot level to, 500 foot? What does it really mean to me? And part of it also is, if you think about Senator Stefanik's and some of the discussion earlier, most of the people in New Mexico turn on a tap to get their water. And most of them, or many of them, do that from a public water supply system or a mutual domestic, and they don't know what Senator Stefanik's knows about being in a rural community and having a well and all the other things that go with it. So it's a smaller part of the community that is seeing these impacts and seeing them as acute impacts and reacting to that. And a larger part of the community sees things happening around them, but still turning on the water, still being able to meet some of the demands. And so perhaps the perception is not so much, hey, this is going to be a big impact on us. And the reaction is to a big fire that happens, but less so to other things like I mentioned before about this tree die-off, pinyon die-off right behind my house in Santa Fe. And that's just kind of like, well, it's happening. It's not a great thing to see, but it's just occurring, and maybe there's nothing we can do about it. And I think that's what we're kind of wrestling with here when it comes to some of the recommendations that are there. I wanted to highlight a couple of things with regards to the policy-related items, and I think we're almost seeing two different levels of recommendations relative to policy. One of it is, oh my gosh, the climate change is coming. We have this much more difficult situation. We need to change everything, right? Because this isn't going to work. And then on the other side, it's a much more surgical kind of or tactical type of a response. And it's strange. They seem to be in opposition to one another from what I can see. One side is we need more flexibility to be able to move water around and to do that administratively to meet a lot of the demands. And the other side of it is we need less of that because we're not necessarily being protective of the seniors or thinking of it from an equity standpoint. And so we have both of those that are kind of competing against each other in what we see, what we've heard. Across the board, we see this aspect of reducing water demand in all sectors and finding ways to do that. But one or two people recognized the kind of reality within the New Mexico water situation, particularly when it goes to farming. If we improve irrigation efficiency, we reduce the losses from a canal, let's say, to the aquifer system. We do a better job of delivering water to the plants. Those plants will consume more water. We're certainly being more efficient. We're reducing the demand of water from the stream, but in many cases, we're increasing the total amount of water that's consumed. And so from a water budget perspective, we're not, in the end, we may be solving a local problem, but the larger problem is not necessarily dealt with. We had comments about compacts, and I think Mike Hammond talked about that, a little bit this morning. And I'm day-to-day involved in Colorado River discussions, Rio Grande compact discussions, Pecos River compact discussions, and it is a very difficult thing to think about interacting with our other partners for change when we want more, which means that they would have less. And in reality, for a compact to be modified, you've got to have all parties coming to the table and feeling like they're doing the best they can for their states. Very difficult thing. Has happened on the Colorado River. The difference on the Colorado River is that the agreements are all about how do you manage with a full supply of water, right? Something that New Mexico hasn't had for probably, in all reality, for 20 years. It's a much more difficult situation when you're working with 5, 10, maybe 30% of what people would consider to be a full supply. Colorado River hasn't experienced that to date. They do have very innovative parties that are involved with things. And I certainly hope we can continue the process of collaboration on the Colorado that has gone on for the last 20 years. But it's a different situation if you're on the Pecos or on the Rio Grande with Texas than it is with the Colorado River Basin states from my perspective on that. And I'll just say that piece. The other part that I found really kind of interesting, and it has to do with me looking at NELIA, and I have one more thing after this that I'll bring up, and it relates to this idea of we need water shortage sharing agreements, we need environmental flow programs, and so on. Well, in the state of New Mexico, we have the Active Water Resource Management Statute, which is unique in all of the West, right? Relative to shortage sharing agreements. We have that as law that went through 8 to 10 years of litigation, right? Clearly, that's not communicated enough as a shortage sharing agreement and what that means. And it's a big disconnect there. Also with things like the need for an environmental flow program. I mean, we have the strategic water reserve that goes a part way to that. We've never been able to get the resources and funding for it. So there's this disconnect between the needs and what actually exists and what might be necessary. And NELIA and others down at the Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources in the past did their decision maker conferences talking about water law and a lot of these issues. What I hear from a lot of these recommendations is really a need to get back to that type of thing so that we are talking the same language as we do things. Increased funding for water supply systems, public, rural, whatever other piece that you can think of, right? And it's across the board in here with a lot of our different communities. We have aging infrastructure. The senator said this. We don't have the structure within state government to take that type of thing on from beginning to end, nor do those small communities. And it's something I think we lost in the last 10 or 15 years, that ability to reach out and help local communities and help them make their own decisions, provide technical and other resources. When you're volunteers doing things, it's very difficult to negotiate the state system for funding, to say nothing about the federal system. And so we hear that a lot. And with that, I just wanted to put let's see if there was any other main piece I wanted to bring up.
Rolf, you've got like 6 minutes.
Well, I'm there for questions though, because let's listen to a few, because I think the other stuff is science and water budget.
Good. I've got a question from Norm Baum. Does New Mexico need a Rio Grande shortage sharing plan similar conceptually to the Colorado River drought contingency plan? Interesting.
Well, I think we actually have implemented things more on a handshake basis than what we've seen on the Colorado, on the Middle Rio Grande in the last 5 to 10 years. Under Mike Hammond's tenure as the executive director, there were a number of different activities joint between the ISC, ANMAR GCD, others like the Water Authority, for trying to improve water deliveries into Elephant Butte. And they did help, but they aren't enough. So we need to do more. And potentially we need to bring more people to the table in that regard, because I really do believe we're seeing the impacts of aridity in our parts of our state already when it comes to things like the summer thunderstorm events and monsoons. We had 10 inches of rain around parts of Socorro this summer. In my 30 years of experience in the past, when we had that, we would get very significant inflows, local inflows to Elephant Butte Reservoir. Those really didn't happen this year. So, is it that the rain was spotty and maybe that wasn't everywhere, or is it really we're not getting the type of runoff that we would in the past, and we're going to have to come up with different approaches. Now, Mike laid out a few. We're going to be talking about more of them in the upcoming session, but we need to do more for sure.
Great. Thank you, Rolf. I also want to highlight Layla Sturgis's comment in the chat. We are actively looking for Navajo Nation wells that we could treat with RO technology. Is that recovering? What is that?
Reverse osmosis?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
reverse
thank you.
osmosis.
Great. This is a student-led Navajo Tech research effort looking to create fresh water from unusable sources. And she's got a link there to that project. That's really interesting and inspiring, a student-led Navajo Tech project looking for Navajo Nation wells to treat. So I just wanted to be sure that everybody on the call was aware of that. Rolf, if you've got any comment on that.
I just have one, and
Yeah.
Lucy, it goes to Senator Stefanik's point about interaction with decision makers, the policy makers at the legislature. I find in my experience, part of the issue in rural communities is it's not the volunteers. The volunteers are very dedicated, but if you come up with systems that require a whole lot of expert knowledge to be able to operate them and maintain them, it's very hard to do. Number one, with the training piece of that, but number two, with the cost, right? And so if you're going to put the capital into something, you got to have a process for the operations and maintenance. And as New Mexico Tech knows, and a lot of us know, there's lots of money for capital, right? But there's not necessarily money for O&M. And it's certainly not something that we get funding to help support people with. They've got to do that themselves. So you got to balance those, the actual long-term resource availability in these different communities to take on whatever new technology might be available, and find a way. If we're going to do it and put the capital there, we better find a way to support those communities long-term to be able to maintain them.
I totally agree. And I'm just going to give a plug that Nelia put it in the comment too. This is really just kind of a first step in building these next generation of water scientists and water resource engineers with a pilot project that's funded with some filtration units that we could use. But yes, it's maintaining filtration units is a expensive and timely endeavor.
And Nelia points out that it also is a chance to train the next generation of water scientists, which is something that will benefit us all for sure. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Rolf. Thank you, Nelia, so much. Really, really appreciate your being here today and presenting, as well as all of the backup that you've provided and input you've provided for the dialogue this last year. It's just been incredible and rich. So thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to move us. We've got a 10-minute presentation on this water survey that I mentioned. Very exciting. It's just hot off the press. And then we're going to break for lunch and come back if you wish to come back for this networking time that I talked about earlier, and I'll talk about it more after we hear about this survey. So Nina, I understand that Patrick is going to present, or are you going to present? We're happy to hear from either.
We're going to present together, Lucy.
Great.
So if Patrick can be unmuted as well, we'll be going back and forth a little bit here as we go through the presentation. And am I sharing my screen, or Jeff, are you putting up the presentation? Or Jeffrey, my apologies.
It's up to you. If you have a good connection and you feel like you can share your screen, then feel free to go ahead.
Okay. Just give me one moment here. Hopefully everyone is seeing my screen now.
Yes, you did it. Good work.
Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us here to hear this information right before lunch and before the break. And thank you to the Water Dialogue for making time for this presentation. Before we dive into the poll and its results, we're going to take a quick moment for introductions. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nina Karanko, and I'm a program officer at the Water Foundation. A little bit about the Water Foundation. It's a collaboration among funders throughout the country with a common interest in securing safe water for people, restoring freshwater ecosystems, and building climate resilience. We do this through equitable grant making, field building, and designing and executing advocacy campaigns. Our work is primarily focused in the Western United States, and we've been funding in New Mexico for the past 2 years. So I'm going to have Patrick briefly introduce himself before we go on with the poll results.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Patrick McCarthy. I'm a water policy officer for the Thornburg Foundation, which is based in Santa Fe, and we work to improve water governance and build water and climate resilience in New Mexico through grant making and partnerships. And I'll turn it back to Nina.
Thanks, Patrick. And thank you to the Thornburg Foundation for your partnership and collaboration on this project. So I'm going to walk you through some highlights from a recent poll the foundations commissioned together. Research and Polling Inc. conducted the poll in late 2021. They completed 706 phone interviews that resulted in a survey from a representative sample of voters in New Mexico. While the poll shows that issues like crime and the economy are top of mind for voters, as well as the pandemic, voters do overwhelmingly indicate their concern for water and a desire for action on water issues when directly asked if it is a very serious issue in New Mexico. The poll confirms what many in this room know, that water is important to New Mexicans, our way of life, and voters want it protected now. But it also clearly shows that New Mexicans have a broad and comprehensive view of water beyond traditional topics like infrastructure and dams. Their view includes water quality, river health, and water data. I'm going to run you through, with the help of Patrick later, some high-level information from the poll. It's going to highlight what was important to voters and the policy initiatives they supported. There's urgency. The poll indicates voters support policy action now to protect our water and to address the water issues our state faces. 3 out of 4 voters, as you can see on the slide, say we need to act now to ensure there's adequate water supply for future generations. The poll looked at the topic of water data. 84% of voters support sharing water data. 64% of voters support increasing funding to modernize the state's water data management systems. Sustainability. The poll also saw approximately 3 out of 4 voters support increasing funding for water infrastructure, and that 2/3 of voters agree we need to modernize and dedicate funding to water quality and supply issues. I'm going to turn it over to Patrick to finish out our presentation.
Okay, thank you, Nina. We also asked a number of questions about drinking water supplies. And as you can see, a clear majority of voters support funding and technical support to rural water systems that are interested in forming stronger, higher capacity regional water systems, addressing some of the concerns that Senator Stefanix and others addressed earlier today. With respect to farming and ranching, if you could advance the slides, Nina.
Sorry, my mouse is giving me, there we go, Patrick.
Yeah, with respect to farming and ranching, we have a number of questions. And again, this is just a high-level summary. There will be much more information that we can offer later from this just completed poll. We found that most voters support the use of public funds, as you can see, to improve water use efficiency on farms and ranches. It's also extremely important to New Mexicans, building on what Rolf was saying earlier, to ensure a reliable supply of water to farms for food security. Next slide. We also asked about river health. Mexicans overwhelmingly support protection of river health, and they also support increased funding to help improve watershed, river, and stream health. Fully 69% support increased funding across the board. So, in conclusion, it's clear that voters support action now. They want the state government to make changes in water policy and to increase funding for water resilience. These results largely confirm and support many of the messages we heard earlier today from Representative Romero, from Mike Hammond, and from Senator Stefanik. Ensuring a sustainable future for New Mexico's farm ranches, affordable supplies.
Patrick, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's some static kind of paper shuffling, some kind of sound that's interfering with your presentation, just yours. I don't know if it's you or I've looked and everybody's muted. It looks like everyone is muted. So I don't know if it's you or if it was Nina, but I just wanted to alert you.
Well,
let's see how it goes. Yeah.
And I'm sure it's me.
No, I'm not sure. No.
So, okay, let me resume. Ensuring a sustainable future for New Mexico's farms and ranches, ensuring affordable supplies for New Mexico's communities, and protecting river health and the environment requires investment as well as management and regulatory reforms. That's our key takeaway. So thanks again for your attention today on behalf of me and Nina. This presentation is just a small portion of the poll results, and we are planning to hold accordingly a more in-depth presentation soon that breaks down the results by demographic groups, including political affiliation, region, and rural urban residents. So keep on the lookout for that event information from us. And in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to one of us or both of us to learn more about this work. Thanks so much.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you both. And we've had quite a bit of chatting about your survey. Maybe we'll just, if you want to take a look, or I will highlight, we'll just take a couple of minutes. The survey showed, this is from Nelia, showed 84% of respondents favor water data being publicly available. From the other 16% were reasons given for why water data should not be made public.
Yeah, Lucy, shall I address that question?
Please, sure. Yeah.
Well, Nelia, the structure of the poll and the length was such that we could not and did not ask folks why they did not support a particular policy reform initiative or funding initiative. We had something like 80 questions, I want to say. We were really stretching the limits of what people on the phone or how long they were willing to stay on the phone. So I'm afraid we don't have that sort of negative information, if you will. That being said, there are a few hints at why some of the respondents may have answered that way when you look at the answers to that question in the context of the rest of the poll.
Great. And Sharon Howsam suggests that in some cases, tribal governments do not want to share their water data, don't want it to be public as a matter of data sovereignty and related to water rights, which of course is perfectly understandable. Yes. There also was a comment from Ralph Rohns that if you had asked willingness to pay, the percentages might have changed, might have gone down. And that
I can address that. Yes, Ralph, I agree with your observation. And there are a handful of willingness to pay questions that are in the poll that we didn't share with you today. But in fact, they did find that willingness to pay for certain of these measures was quite high, particularly for drinking water and for watershed protection.
Great, great. And one last one, did the poll only include New Mexico voters?
Yes, we oversampled the Native American community because we wanted to make sure their voices were heard. Otherwise, it was sort of a straight up poll of 700 plus voters, New Mexicans only.
Great. One last, please keep us informed. Uh-oh, I lost it. Of when and where the longer presentation will be held.
We will do that, and we hope to work with the water dialogue to make that happen, to help us organize that. So
terrific.
Thank you.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, both of you. Really interesting. So I want to say what's going to happen next. You're going to take a 15-minute lunch break. And now let me back up. Some of you may need to leave, and that's completely fine. Thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you in the morning. For those of you that want to participate in the network lunch chat time on screen, Sophia is ready to create breakout rooms so that you can pretend you're there at the Pueblo Cultural Center having a fabulous lunch. Oh, I missed that so bad. So what's going to happen now is we'll go on a 15-minute lunch break. Those of you that want to participate in the networking chatting time, no agenda, no time limit, no whatever, just come and go as you wish. We will open those rooms and put you in those rooms at random at 20 minutes after the hour. We'll wait a couple minutes for people to come back. So if you're interested in that, please come back at 12:20. And in the meantime, have a nice break or have a nice rest of the day. And we will see you in the morning, or we will see you in 20 minutes. So great. Thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful morning together. Appreciate it. Break time. Oh,